All right, looks like we are live. Hello, everybody. Going to be talking about memory today. Now, before I do that, I want to start by typing something in the chat. I'm hoping this will come up so that every time somebody pops in, I don't have to remind them to ask questions if they want to. So let me just type that here real quick and then we'll jump right into things. All right, perfect. Hopefully that shows up on the actual video once we get into it. But anyways, let's jump right into the content. So I'm going to be talking about false memories. This is a really fascinating area and has super widespread implications for not only clinical contexts, but also forensic contexts and also for our exploration of what awakening entails. False memories and memories in general set the basis up for essentially everything that we know and everything that we do and everything that we can recall. And we will see that false memories carry a very close correlation to altered states of consciousness. I will touch on that towards the end, but first things first, let's do a brief overview of memory because for some people, especially those who aren't within the clinical realm, memory kind of has a face valid definition, but beyond that, it's a little confusing. So let me pull up a memory chart here, just a brief description of what different levels of memory are, and then I'll go over that with you very quickly here. So hang on one second. If we do types of memory, that'll work a little better. Oh, perfect. Here we go. So let me go ahead and switch screens here to types of memory. That is good. Let me double check here. Okay, my face is still here. I'm going to hope YouTube pings me if somebody asks any questions. These live streams are really for you all, the public, whoever wants to listen and ask any questions. You are absolutely welcome to. That's the whole reason I'm doing this. So please don't hesitate to ask anything if you want to. Okay, types of memory. Let me just check back here one more time. Oh, looks like the screen might have frozen. It's a good thing I checked. Let me try this again. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. We are in now. So types of memory. Yes, let's go into this. Here at the top, we have memory. All right, and we're going to break that down into different categories. So we have short-term memory, long-term memory, explicit memory, implicit memory, episodic, semantic, priming, procedural. Now, I will clarify that when you get into the memory scholars, memory literature, there are many subtypes. We're not really doing that here. We're not splitting hairs. We're just going to talk about categories of memory. As with other content, if there's interest, I will go much further in depth because we could probably spend several hours or several days just talking about short-term memory. Absolutely fascinating stuff here. So with memory, the two main branches here are long-term memory and short-term memory. These are just like they sound. So short-term memory is our memory that exists within a particular time frame. And this is usually focused on, looks like I can't scroll from here, but I can here. So this is our brain's ability to remember small amounts of information for short periods of time. The shortest, I mean, that's debatable. It may not be working memory. There could be a shorter subtype, which we could go into, and I'm not going to bother here. We'll just say working memory. That's fine. So this is something like, I'm going to give you a string of numbers. I would like for you to repeat them back to me in the same order. 9, 3, 7, 1. Okay, and then the person sits there and thinks, and then they say 9, 3, 7, 1. That's an example of working memory. You will see a lot of intellectualized assessments, neurocognitive assessments. They will look into categories of working memory, short-term memory. It's relatively easy to assess and compared to normative populations. So that would be short-term memory. And again, lots of different branches. Switch back here. Okay, lots of different branches for short-term memory, but here we just have a basic category. Okay, long-term memory, we can split this into explicit and implicit memories. So explicit, this is what we can explicitly recall, what we can consciously recall. If I ask you, hey, what's your birthday? And you remember that and that is consciously recalled, that's an example of an explicit memory. Implicit memory, this is a little different. These are types of memories that we cannot consciously recall, but we can still access in certain ways. So an example, most common example here is riding a bike, and that specifically is a type of procedural memory. Once you learn how to ride a bike, you are able to get onto that bicycle and you can just pedal, you can just kind of go. I recently picked up a manual car. I hadn't driven a manual in a few years, and I was able to just shift the gears and I was able to drive the car without stalling out because I had driven for quite a while beforehand. I already had the experience, the implicit procedural memory was already there for me. priming is priming is a different type of implicit memory. An easy way to think about this one is something like Mary had a little, and someone says lamb, right? That's the first thing that comes to your head, but it could actually be something like Mary had a little dolphin, right? Mary had a little lamb comes to us first because that's what we're primed to recall. So in our implicit long-term memory. Mary had a little lamb. That's often what we hear as a song as a child, plays through and through, and that's what we recall. Let me see if they have a different type of example for priming. Yeah, one stimulus influences your brain's response to another. Fine, we can say that too. Back here. Okay. And then within the explicit category, so procedural, I mentioned the bicycle, I mentioned the manual car, motor memories, things like that. Those are procedural memories. Even let's say you have an itch and you instinctively put your hand in a certain spot in your face, that could be a procedural type of memory as well. As with all other cognitive domains, aspects of memory, the different dimensions of memory, these are all interconnected. Sometimes it's pretty rare, but sometimes you might see certain categories of memory in isolation, but more often than not, you're going to see an intermix of different types of memory. On the explicit side, could things we can consciously recall for types of memory, episodic and semantic. So episodic, just like it says here, events that happen to you. Tell me about that time you were in a car accident, right? The episodic memory comes to mind there. Maybe it doesn't if you had a really bad brain injury, but ideally, the episodic memory comes to your mind and then you're able to recall it. Semantic memory, so general knowledge of the world. Who was the 14th president? Something like that. That could be a type of semantic long-term memory there. Okay, so basic types of memory here. And again, when we talk about false memories, oftentimes these come up as explicit types of memory. People are thinking about autobiographical information. Hey, this event happened to me. It was a really emotional, challenging experience. And then, as I'll talk about later, for certain clinical and forensic techniques within psychological sciences, we have different methods to assess the veracity or the accuracy of some of these claims. But in truth, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to differentiate a false memory from an accurate memory because the neural structures involved are so similar between false memories and accurate memories. We often have to turn to evidence to get into to find a different type of conclusive answer because you are not just going to get that trying to assess somebody's nonverbal or someone's recall or how much they believe what they said. It's just far too subjective. Memory as a whole is pretty subjective, right? Imagine an event happens, there's 100 people around the event. If you ask 100 people what happened, you might get 100 different details about what happened. The general event might be similar, but the interpretation, the impact of somebody's other memories and life experiences, those all play a part in how memories are generated. Okay. I think I'm going to pass on going through the neurobiology of memory. We could do that. The track involves a lot of limbic structures, a lot of C-shaped structures, as we like to call them, amygdala, hippocampus, fornix. I think we'll skip over the neurobiology, not really what I want to get into here. So let me skip over into a very controversial syndrome, which we call the false memory syndrome. I'm going to switch screens here. Hang on one second. All right, let's go to this one. Okay, is that showing up? Yeah, it is. It is. Okay. This is an old article, and I'm doing this on purpose because this is a really famous article. It's from a psychologist named Elizabeth L. Loftus. She's pretty famous within psychological sciences for memory research. And what she has looked into are false memories. That's what she's pretty well known for. Now, I will say this, there's a difference between false memories and false memory syndrome. Okay. We really have to make a distinction there because if we think of those two things as the same, we're going to run into problems in literature and how people understand these two. False memory syndrome, we're talking about something like a DSM category of level of specificity. We're saying there is a specific syndrome, a cluster of behaviors and biopsychosocial factors that cause someone to have false memories more often than not. This is totally different than just saying that someone can have false memories. We know very well in the literature, people can have false memories. Absolutely no question about that. But the false memory syndrome piece, like trying to pinpoint that to a certain person, hey, this person has these personality characteristics, therefore they're more likely to develop a false memory syndrome. That that's very controversial to say the least. And I'll go into this a little bit later, but when you get into the forensic psychology side and the types of defenses people will come up with for different crimes they are charged with, I work on the criminal side. Oh my God, you will see everything for defense. There was a successful defense called the gay panic defense that is well beyond what we're going to talk about here, but absolutely people will look to anything. So let me move down on this article a little bit. So, false memory syndrome and false memories, we'll talk about both of those. This article is from 1995, believe it or not. And a lot of the things in this article are still relevant today. They've also been relevant centuries and centuries ago. That's one of the first examples here. She talks about satanic cults and a lot of different memories. There was a famous case, I believe it's listed here. Yeah, here we go. A woman in her mid 70s and her recently deceased husband were accused by both of their adult daughters of rape, sodomy, forced oral sex, torture by electric shock. You can read on if you want. And just a lot of crazy, a lot of very, very severe types of events that these two daughters recalled. Now, we have to take into account ages and the amount of time that has elapsed, because we know from literature the more amount of time that has elapsed. And for whoever is sitting in, I'm not sure if my chat is showing up. You are absolutely welcome to ask any questions, or if you just want to listen along, no pressure at all, whatever you're comfortable with. You have to take into account the amount of time that has passed since an event. The more time that has passed, just like you would imagine, the less accurate somebody's recall is, generally speaking. And this also involves factors such as emotions. If the recall of an event or the type of event that occurred is highly emotional, it is much more likely that the type of memory the person is going to have is inaccurate. And the reason for this, there's a whole bunch of neurobiological theories, but as you look into the neurobiology, you see that the way memories are formed, they are intimately evolved. Excuse me, they are intimately involved with different types of emotional structures in the brain. So emotions play a very, very integral part in how memories are formed or not formed. So, anyways, yeah, lots of very, very serious claims here that were made. And the really sad part, I'll get into that in a second, but the really sad part here is that the woman was found guilty. And most of this evidence people would think of as hearsay, right? We're talking about something that happened decades ago. We don't really have much proof otherwise. We're just saying that these heinous, drastic, severe things happened decades ago, and now we're accusing somebody decades later. And when you do that, the types of claims that you make and the types of accusations that you give, those also have an impact on the listeners, right? The judge, the attorneys, the experts, the jury, these are all people as well. And when you say things like what's listed here, smeared the blood all over her body, handed the knife to her, expecting her to kill the animal, these things evoke so many emotions that we're also going to see impact on the listeners as well. And this is still ongoing today, although it's not as bad as it was about a decade ago. People who make claims about allegations related to trauma, abuse, things of that nature, it's more likely than not you are guilty until proven innocent, as opposed to the other way around, which is a really, really sad thing. Now, what I was going to mention earlier is that this goes both ways, right? You also want to listen to the person who's making the accusation as well. Maybe these things really did happen to the person and they didn't want to talk about what happened for decades because of how traumatic and difficult it was. That's a whole other story there. So, this is where having good evaluators, having a really good assessment, and being able to distinguish types of memory helps out a lot. Because in the forensic cases, if we aren't able to do this, it's just too difficult to tell between accurate and inaccurate types of memories. Now, for myself, when I'm working on the criminal side, when we're going through sanity evaluations, again, I won't go into depth for those because it's just beyond the scope of what we're doing here. When we go into sanity evaluations, we are often trying to have the individual, the defendant in most cases, recall information that was difficult for them to recall for whatever reason, because by nature of an insanity defense, they are most likely exhibiting or suffering from some type of severe mental disease or defect. Now, that isn't always the case. There could be things like alcohol intoxication, somebody's come in for an OBI. There could be things like someone is just, I mean, this comes up more often than not, but someone is just totally BSing and they're just trying to get out of whatever charge they have. And then there are also very genuine cases, right? Somebody with a very severe type of schizoaffective disorder, for example, or schizophrenia. They were acutely ill. Maybe they had their Invega injection, and then, which is an antipsychotic medication, by the way. And once there's this known pattern in schizophrenia and psychotic disorders, when people are given medications and they see improvement, they start to think they don't need the medication because they're better, and then they spiral. And then once they're acutely ill, they don't want to take those medications again. So in those cases, very severe types of psychotic disorders, bipolar disorders, severe major depressive disorders, there's a whole bunch of different diagnoses that are involved. And honestly, it's more specific than diagnosis. It's more so about the way these clusters of behaviors impact somebody. But anyways, you have this whole range of genuine to not so genuine presentation. And what we do in these sanity evaluations is we try to get as much context as we can. There's certain clinical or forensic types of interviews. Nothing's fully reliable for distinguishing false memories, but these types of interviews can help, and interview techniques, I should say, can help with determining things, right? If somebody's making a claim like what's listed in this article, let me see here. Mother caught a rabbit, chopped off one of its ears, smeared body all over, blood all over her body. We could look at that, and for example, maybe there's an allergy history for the mom or something, and she happens to be allergic to rabbits, or maybe there's some type of fear of blood that the mom has always had. Once you get that contextual information and you get a little bit more evidence, you can use that evidence, the hard points that you know, to assess the validity of certain types of memory issues. And this is where a lot of skill comes in as the evaluator. I won't go into that too much here, but you can try to do that to a good extent. If I'm being totally honest, sometimes it's just too difficult to tell, and you have to go off of what you have. But, anyways, the woman was found guilty of neglect. And this is really, really important because for anyone who works in clinical or forensic settings or with people in general, they often talk about things like repressed memories, I can't remember something because of the traumas I went through. And you don't want to be inconsiderate in saying that, repressed memories, things of that nature, are not really supported by science. But it is true to an extent. And the more we adhere to these types of views and takes, especially when they involve legal consequences, the more we're going to run into problems because people buy these things into face value. I'm going to show you a couple articles here shortly. Just a vast majority of, not vast majority, but I forget the exact percentages. It's well over 20, 30%. 20, 30% or more of people believe in repressed memories, dissociative amnesias. All of these things are not well supported by the science, but nevertheless are face valid in terms of what people believe. So we'll go to that in just a second. Let me scroll down here to different types of therapies that are involved. And this is a really, I think this is really sad, but it does happen a lot in therapies of any kind. It doesn't matter what the therapy is. And yeah, again, this is just really sad, but it is what it is. And the people who do these things, they're often trying to help more than anything else, but they make things a little bit worse, which we'll see here shortly. So they decided to, for this article, send certain informants, if you want to call them that, to various therapists' offices. And some of the things they found were just appalling. Okay. In the first session, Ruth told the therapist she had been rear ended in an auto accident a few months earlier and was having trouble getting over it. Ruth said that she would just sit for weeks and cry for no apparent reason. Therapists seemed totally disinterested in getting history regarding the accident, but wanted to talk about Ruth's childhood. Okay. While discussing her, and I believe Ruth is an informant. Let me see here. Yeah, private investigator called herself Ruth, right? So Ruth volunteered a recurring dream she had in childhood. And then the therapist takes that and starts to make these strange connections about childhood, trauma, how they're showing up, and how they're manifesting. It's almost like a type of gaslighting, strangely enough. And yeah, I don't want to comment too much on actually, I do. I think the therapist's approach here is completely inappropriate because not only are they engaging in unfalsifiable, invalid claims about memories, you can't just look at someone's childhood and then determine, hey, these memories were accurate, these memories were not accurate. I get the psychoanalytic, psychodynamic part, but it is really easy to take that too far and cause problems in someone's life because you were saying something happened in childhood that maybe really didn't. You don't know. How could you know something from someone's childhood is accurate or not? It's too difficult to tell. So now now the therapist is tying things in like affairs, generational things. I'm not going to read through here. You can do that on your own time if you'd like. I wanted to get here to the actual comments. Just I was so surprised when I read this for the first time. Where's that quote I was looking for? Yeah, that in the imagery the child took you, or the child showed you the bedroom and your father holding you down in the bedroom. It'd be really hard for me to think otherwise. Something would have to come up in your work to really prove it wasn't about sexual abuse. Blah, blah. And they go on for a little bit. Scroll through here so you can read if you want. And I thought this is funny. They left the charges in, the amount of money that the sessions cost. And anyways, when you read through, you'll see that the therapist essentially not only gaslit the person, but also kind of injected these odd types of memories or beliefs that the person then starts to believe. And I'll show you in the other two articles, these memories, once the person starts to believe them, they adhere to them. So the therapist maybe completely fabricated a memory about sexual abuse from the father or something. It was actually perhaps some innocuous event. And now the patient believes it. So when they believe it, they're going to say it with full conviction. When they say it with full conviction, it's very, very difficult to tell what's accurate and what's not. Okay, so let's scroll down here. I didn't want to spend too much time on this particular article. So I'll move down here to the final remarks piece. We live in a culture of accusation. This is true today. This has been true before, and it's probably going to be true in the future as well. Unfortunately, it's just something that has to do with many different psychological functions, and it is just something that we have to deal with, unfortunately. Okay, let's see. The main call here is not accepting memories at face value. There's a very important reason why we look to evidence for forensics cases. This is also really important for clinical cases. When we're doing therapy, we don't want to make patients believe things that aren't true. We want to help the patient find ways to navigate in figuring out what's important with them and resolving their issues. We don't want to gaslight them. We don't want to inject false memories into them. We want to help patients navigate in the most accurate and true way possible. So that's the bottom line here. We don't want to accept memories and claims at face value because memories as a whole are pretty inaccurate when it comes to people. People are pretty bad with recalling information. It's just the nature of how things are. All right. I'm going to switch here to the second article. Let me zoom in here so you can see that. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay, Return of the Repressed, the persistent and problematic claims of long forgotten trauma. All right, so they they cut right into the chase. Can purely psychological trauma lead to a complete blockage of autobiographical memories? Okay, the answer here, I believe, is no, but let me check here. It's been a while since I looked at this. Yeah, as far as my understanding goes, the answer is no, right? There might be some factors involved with psychological trauma and how they impact the ability to recall information, but complete blockage is not supported. Okay. So let's go down some key points in this article just to help give some more information on false memories. This is still something, I mentioned this earlier, still ongoing with literature, and it's going to be ongoing for the near future. There just seem to be different ways of thinking about issues at hand. And I think I have an understanding for what's going on here. I'll explain that in just a second. So, repressed memories and the memory wars, it's a very dramatic way, but perhaps not so dramatic way of describing what's been going on. So, on one side, repressed memories are not supported by literature. And then on the other side, repressed memories are supported. They do exist, they are real. This is kind of like talking about multiple personality disorder, more accurately, more recently, dissociative identity disorder. When you look at the DSM-5 TR criteria for dissociative identity disorder, you see that they mention multiple personality states. Okay, this is different from actual multiple personalities. What we're talking about here is the difference between whether quite literally somebody has multiple personalities, or does somebody have multiple presentations of personality states. Those are two totally different things, and I believe it's a similar mechanism to what's going on with these memory wars and memory issues. On one side, we're looking at things very literally. It's my cat, you can hear. Are memories, in fact, false, right? In the sense that, do false memories exist? Not false memories, do repressed memories exist? versus do repressed memories actually exist in the way that people talk about them? Okay, so two different categories here. This is where I believe a lot of these differences are. On one hand, yes, people do describe types of difficulties with recalling memories that do truly exist. People do have difficulties with recalling memories at times. On the other hand, are there actually repressed memories from unconscious drives and Freudian this and psychoanalytic that? No, that's not supported by literature. And I believe it's this article. It might be I believe it's the other one. We'll go into that. There are some alternative explanations for why people might have difficulties with recalling information. Okay, so we'll move on from the memory wars here. And this part of the article is just a surprising percentage of even professionals, clinical psychologists, people in the field, right? 20, 30, more than that, agree that traumatic memories uncovered by hypnosis are authentic. This is just, I've used the word appalling before, but I'll use it again. We know pretty well that memories recovered from hypnosis, and hypnosis is a type of altered state of consciousness, by the way. We know pretty well that those types of memories are highly questionable and oftentimes not accurate. They can be injected by the therapist or whatever the provider's name is. They can also be believed by the person who's in the trance or the state at the time. And I could talk about my own experience for that as well, which I will later on if we have time. The admissibility as well in court, this should be quite telling as well. The admissibility of hypnosis recalled memories, it's pretty low to none, just depends on the jurisdiction you are under, but it's pretty much never the case. I believe most, maybe not most, but a lot of judges and attorneys out there, they kind of look at those things with a little bit of skepticism now, which I think is for good reason. So, anyways, there's a surprising number of people who believe these things. Look, when we get to laypersons here, 89% of 613 undergraduates were familiar with the circumstance in which somebody recovered a repressed memory. So already we're talking about recovered a repressed memory. That's already within the frame of believing in those repressed memories. So anyways, just a really high percentage of people who believe these things. And again, I want to hit this on the head again. It has such important implications for clinical, forensic, legal, every type of situation. The types of memories we can recall or can't recall have widespread implications. Imagine you are sitting there and you're being tried for a case because somebody decided that you sexually assaulted them 20 years or you did something, and they're basing it off of what they think they know from their memory. Now, obviously, again, memory is not something we should totally just throw out the door. Memory does have some value as well. We just have to analyze deeper what's going on. We should not take memories at face value. That's what's important here. Okay. Yeah, this is an interesting thing too as well. Dissociative amnesia and repressed memories. It really is true. When you look at the criteria for dissociative amnesia and you compare it to repressed memories, they overlap a lot. And they do seem to be very comparative, perhaps even the same thing, just in different clothing. I'm not going to go into that too much here. Just understand that the same scrutiny that exists for repressed memories, it also exists for dissociative amnesias. Okay. I believe that's all I wanted to go into this article. Oh, okay. I think I was wrong, actually. It is this article that mentions some of the mechanisms for why people mention repressed memories. One of the big mechanisms is that, where is that? Hang on one second. The other. Well, anyways, I'll just talk about it. It doesn't matter where it is in the article. People sometimes say that they have repressed memories and they can't remember things, but really they do. They just don't remember that they've talked about the repressed memories before. That is an interesting effect. I forget the name for it though. It might come up as I'm scrolling through the article, but that does tend to come up quite often as people try to recall things. I notice this a lot in my own practice, right? If I just give somebody a basic assessment to recall maybe a list of 5 words, they will often make category errors. Let's say one of the words was, oh, I don't know, let's say it was table. And then the person says desk instead of table, and they'll believe fully that I said desk to begin with, but in fact it was just table. Those kinds of related category things can cause difficulties with memory also. Okay. Yeah, so again, just reports of covered memories in therapy. EMDR is a big culprit here. I might just make a separate video on EMDR. This is another case, that same type of mechanism I was talking about before. The evidence base that EMDR purports to work is not accurate, but EMDR does help in its way. It is clinically useful, but in terms of the literature support and the actual science behind it, it does not do what it claims to do, right? There's all sorts of strange literature out there about moving the eyes and how that reprocesses information that, yeah, no, that's imaginal exposure for the most part is what makes EMDR work. But EMDR does help people in certain ways. And you see this in clinical practice. The different types of therapies that are mainstream, like acceptance and commitment therapy, for example, that is going to work for certain populations. Those, in my experience, are people who are typically more cognitively oriented. EMDR, usually this isn't always the case. They're for people who are more emotionally focused in terms of the content that they want to address, right? If you take somebody from, I can just talk about some of my populations here. In the military, you will have lots of different patient populations. One type of population is an intelligence, and people in the intelligence squadron, they are a certain type of person, right? Very logical, detailed, as you can imagine. And then on the other side, you might have people from different squadrons or different places. Yeah, I'll leave that out. But they are more interested in talking about the feelings of what's going on. EMDR is good for that. So again, are we looking more so at the literature base or the clinical base? That seems to be where things come into play. It certainly is useful to try to recall things from childhood or past experiences that can have clinical utility, but again, we don't want to abuse that, especially with what we know about memories. Okay. I'm going to skip over this. This is a big article. We could spend a long time talking about that. Let me go into the last one here because I want to save some time to talk about how all this stuff is relevant to awakening. That's perhaps the most important because that's what this channel is about. All right, so let me make sure this is popping up on your side. Yeah, there we go. What science tells us about false and repressed memories? So this one, again, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but the main take for this article is that repressed memories are problematic in terms of empirical support. Okay, we don't have good empirical support for repressed memories, especially not the type of memory where it's unconsciously being held back by whatever psychological force. That it sounds really woo, and it's because it is, right? We just don't see the support for that. There's a lot of other logical explanations that could be involved or implicated. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I mentioned this too well, but there are personality types involved with susceptibility. You see this as well for suggestibility, which is totally different, but it does come up in forensic arenas. The susceptibility for people to form false memories, it's really high. And as I've mentioned before, it is much higher when you involve emotional content, flashbulb memories, as people like to mention in some contexts. Okay. Yeah, a lot of repeats for this article. I think I'm just going to skip over much of this stuff. Let me see if there's anything of importance here. Yeah, here we go. It's a good summary piece here. On average, about 30% of participants form false memories in implantation studies. Implanted false memories can occur for negative events and for events that allegedly occurred repeatedly. It doesn't have to just be a single event, it can also be repeated events. You will see that sometimes in literature, but yes, repeated events can also involve false memories. And many people continue to believe in these controversial ideas, even though they are not well supported in science or literature. Again, this is one of those many things in psychological sciences where the more accurate you get for something, it's a perhaps less believed or less upheld because it is not as readily identified or face valid with people. Myers-Briggs, I wrote an article on that a while ago. Myers-Briggs is a great example of this. A lot of like cookie cutter, face valid types of statements. You will do great things in the future, or you are capable of doing much more than you ever imagined, or just there's all sorts of different types of commentary there. Or you can get really down on yourself sometimes. It's like, well, who is that? Who's that not the case for? Okay. Those types of things also, you tend to see similar patterns. So let me exit up here and then we'll just talk like this, perhaps for the rest of the time, maybe not. So how are memories, especially false memories, how are they relevant to the psychology of awakening? And I'll admit, I haven't gone too far in depth on my videos so far talking about some of these things. I don't think I've made a single video on altered states of consciousness yet. I'm still kind of getting used to things and trying to figure out what my audiences want so that I can best meet their needs. But I could probably do a whole series, probably 20, 30 plus videos on altered states of consciousness. There's just so much involved there. And just like hypnosis, altered states of consciousness of any kind involve strange types of memory formations, false memories, difficulties with recalling information. And we'll see those in things like, which again, I'll make videos for in the future, just trying to pan things out currently. Out of body experiences, near death experiences, relaxed states, dreams, all of these things impact how we form memories. And whoever jumped in, feel free to ask any questions. I'm not sure if that shows up in my comment. You don't have to, it's totally up to you. So, when we engage in meditative practices, which, by the way, when practiced in certain ways, in the ways that I teach, they do involve altered states of consciousness. You will start to see unusual types of imagery. And again, this is just a normal thing that our brains do. If you want a clear example of this, you don't have to go into crazy states of meditation. You can just look at your own life, right? What do you do every day? You wake up, you have your daily waking state, you go to sleep, you dream, right? Dreams are altered states of consciousness. Just imagine the crazy stuff that goes on in dreams. Try to explain that to somebody. Everyone kind of gets dreams because they have dreams of their own. But if they didn't have those types of experiences, imagine how hard it would be to explain this. Like, hey, I wake up and then I close my eyes and all this weird stuff starts to happen. I feel like I'm in a tornado, I'm floating in the sky, and I can see the world or whatever it is that's going on. That is really hard to explain to people, right? And when we do types of meditations, the imagery that you see, it can be along similar lines. It sort of emulates a dreamlike state to some extent, but there are a lot of differences. I don't want to go into that here. The point I want to make, staying on the topic here with false memories, is that when you engage in certain types of meditation, the contents of your consciousness will change in suit with the state of consciousness that you are going through. So as you get into more subtle states, you might see things like white lights. You might see things like imagery of beings or certain types of astral things. There's just many categories here. And without going into too much detail there, the types of memories you form from these experiences can be false memories. This is really, really important. And I know people don't want to hear this because when they go through the types of experiences that they do with altered states of consciousness, they want to believe all of those things with full intimacy, right? Oh my God, I saw a white light when I was sitting there, and this was God, and this was that. And they believe those things, but they never stop to think, what else could this be? And why is this important to me? They just take this experience as it is and they attach to it. That is the exact problem that leads to psychological suffering. I'm not sitting here saying that we should disregard all of our states of consciousness or contents of consciousness and push all of these things away. They do have a lot of important meaning and significance. But when we take a stimulus like that and we start to believe it and start to memorize it as a certain type of thing, that's going to lead to a lot of problems because you start to adhere to what you have experienced. And when you do this, you are going to run into problems because it becomes very difficult to see past this type of view that you have formulated for yourself. Think of it this way. For a lot of people, when they go through certain types of meditative practices and they actually get to those deeper states where they have these types of experiences and then they can kind of remember some things about their experience and they remember it was a really peaceful, blissful type of experience and they felt that they were one with God and they saw God and all of these different things and they adhere to that. Suddenly they become more detached from their day-to-day life and they become attached to meditations, practices, and they might even push away their day-to-day life so that they can try to recreate these temporary experiences. You will see this with just about, not just about any spiritual teacher, but a lot of spiritual teachers. They teach you to engage in certain practices. It might be something like out of body experiences, right? There are different types of practices you can engage in that help you with out of body experiences. You can experience similar phenomena or those types of phenomena for yourself. But the type of meaning they attribute to those experiences, that's where you start to get into problems because people become psychologically addicted to what it is that's going on. So again, they are forming certain types of memories about what's happening. And when you form those certain types of memories, it keeps you from being able to make more progress in terms of realizing awakening and freedom from psychological suffering. Adhering to things like out of body experiences, near death experiences, all these other types of experiences, if it helps you, that's great. But in terms of finding an end to psychological suffering, I have not seen that to be the case. I have seen ways that it can help in terms of your mental state, but it doesn't lead to the complete end of psychological suffering because you are still attached, you are still stuck, you are still perhaps even addicted to those types of psychological states. And that leads to problems down the road, whether it's immediate or later on. So again, the false memory piece, it doesn't just show up in our day-to-day life, it also shows up in altered states of consciousness as well. And you'll also see that when you engage in certain types of practices, the types of memories that you get, when you become addicted to them or when you apply your memory to those contents that you experience, it shapes the type of experience that you go through. And I think I can explain that a little bit better. So if you're sitting in a meditative state and you're experiencing certain types of contents, and then you apply your memory to what's going on, maybe you suddenly see an image of a bookshelf or something, and then you think back and you say, in that moment, from your memory, oh, a bookshelf, that was my childhood or something like that. And then you start to make these associations. It changes the type of experience that you have. So not only does this type of memory and attachment to what is experienced regarding the contents of your experience impact how you understand the stimulus, it also impacts what is going on and what is created as the experience you're having progresses. All right, if I didn't explain that super clearly, it's kind of a nuanced point there. The way you apply your memory or do not apply your memory not only shapes what you're seeing in the moment, it also shapes what you see in the future. So that's another example for why when you are attached to certain types of memories or experiences, it keeps you from making progress because you're looping yourself through certain things that can cause attachment and keep you stuck instead of realizing what you need to for psychological awakening. Or, I'm sorry, awakening and freedom from psychological suffering. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, wasn't my intention to go too far in depth there for this video. I wanted to focus more on the false memory piece here. The main takeaway I want to give is that false memories are problematic in the sense that not only are they false, but they are also held onto with an intense attachment and intense belief. That is probably the worst part of false memories. So, how can you control false memories and realize them for yourself? In my opinion, the best way to do this is to maintain a skeptical attitude. I'm not saying you should discount your memories and toss them aside, but you should look to evidence and what you can validate from your experience about what happened. For example, let's say you have a memory from childhood and it involved a certain situation that was emotionally charged. And you remember that there was a stuffed animal that you really liked at that time. And that stuffed animal played a part in what you did in that situation, right? Maybe you were a kid, it was difficult. Then you took the stuffed animal and you held it close, and then you walked into the closet and then you hid or something, and you still have that stuffed animal, then you can validate that, right? The stuffed animal serves as a piece of evidence to what happened during that false, or not the false memory, but during that memory. And when you have that piece of evidence, it's not a definitive conclusion, but it serves as a piece of the puzzle. It's like, okay, there really was a stuffed animal there. There really was something that happened here. I can give a personal example that will help put these things into a little bit more clarity. So, several years ago, was in a car accident. I wasn't the driver for the vehicle, but it was a pretty fast accident because we were going relatively fast. I think we were going like 50, 55 or so. I forget the exact speed, but it was in that ballpark, and it was on an icy bridge. And I remembered that we went on the icy bridge, and there was a little, I forget what it's called, but it's kind of like a set of metal. I forget the name for it, but it makes sure the bridge can move when it needs to. I'm sure if there's any engineering audiences, they'll know what that is. And the bridges always ice over before the roads, right? So it was icy, and then we were going. It was 4-wheel drive, but it didn't matter. And the car started to like veer off to one side. I don't remember which side it was. In my mind, I'm getting that it was the right side, but it's too hard to tell. So started to veer off, hit one of the sidewalls, and then I don't remember from there, but it was kind of like bumper cars. We hit multiple sidewalls. I thought we were going over the bridge. I thought that might be it, and well, it is what it is. And spinning around, and then we finally stopped in the middle of the road. I got out and I was looking at the truck, and then I saw other cars were slipping too because, right, the bridge is frozen. Everyone else is going to slip as well. It doesn't matter if you're in 4-wheel drive or not. And then other cars were coming. So I jumped back into the truck, and then the other car came and hit the side of the truck. And then the truck started spinning even more. And I don't really remember what happened there. And when the officers came out later on and they asked what happened, it was really hard to say anything. I was just sitting there. I was thinking myself about, wow, flashbulb memories, what happened, what's accurate, what's not accurate. So I tried to give things the best I could, but I remember saying, I don't really remember a lot because I was trying to be on the safe side, maybe a little bit more than I should have been, just trying to be as honest as possible. And the good part is that even if there are those types of memories, like my mind was jumping to certain things that I wanted to tell the officer, but I just didn't know for sure if it happened or not. There was a degree of uncertainty there. So I erred on the side of what I could validate. But essentially, what the officer does is, right, when you have a situation that potentially involves false memories because it's emotionally charged. When you're in a life or death accident, you think you might be dying there. They take all the different accounts from people, right? So I don't remember how many it was for this one, but I think it was like 20 or 30 accounts. And they also get an assessment of the road, the condition of the cars, pictures of the cars, what's the debris on the road, what was the temperature that day, what did the iced bridge look like, what was the direction, well, all these different contextual details they gather, different pieces of evidence, right? And then they compare all the different things people said to the evidence that they have. This is exactly how you do it in any type of forensic context. It doesn't it doesn't have to be clinical or psychological. Cat's having fun over there. You take all the evidence, you compare that to the narratives. We know that people's memories are faulty during emotionally charged situations. That's okay. We have to work with it. But we know evidence is evidence, right? Evidence is going to be there regardless. Evidence doesn't really involve a memory, it's just there. That's the beauty of forensics. So when you compare the two, and you take all this data into account, you have some very experienced people who can really analyze the data. That's when you start to see, okay, it's kind of like a best fit line, right? You have your dots on a graph, and then you have your best fit line. It's kind of like that. You map it together and you just draw the best narrative you can. Now, obviously, there are going to be discrepancies, there are going to be difficulties, but that's the best you can do based on the evidence. And that is exactly what we should do with our own memory as well. We should try to best fit those data points into the most cohesive understanding that we can get. We should not go with what comes up first or what comes up most immediately for a memory. We already know about heuristics. Actually, we might not because I didn't go over it in this channel yet. But if you haven't heard of heuristics, it's just kind of shortcuts your brain takes to think about things in certain ways. I'm not going to go into that here, but one of the main heuristics is whatever comes up to your mind first is typically most believed. That is the case with false memories as well. It's like, oh, I just thought of this. I had this memory of something. Surely it must have been the case because it came up first. No, not necessarily so. If anything, quite the opposite. So when we're talking about the psychology of awakening and we have interesting, potentially psychologically addictive experiences during meditative states, altered states of consciousness, even during your day-to-day waking life, you really should look from the basis of insight. And I'll go over what that means in a later video. Again, there's just so many things to go into detail on. It's quite difficult to talk about things without without requiring some level of understanding. But anyways, I should be doing a better job explaining those things. Basis of insight can help with memories because you get that deeper contextualized understanding from evidence that you've gathered and pulled together. And that is more important than just going off a memory that has come up. So the point to take away here, false memories and their relevance to psychology of awakening, you should be very skeptical of what comes up in your mind during meditative practices and when trying to find an end to psychological suffering. Most importantly, you should not attach to what it is that comes up within your memory, not only because it's potentially faulty, but also because attachment or addiction or strict adherence to memories hinders your ability to make progress. When you don't make progress, you're going to get stuck in those loops of believing the memories as they come up and adhering to those beliefs. And when that happens, just like it sounds, you're going to have a hard time making progress there. So again, just do your best to question your own beliefs. I know that's a very strange thing to take away, but I've mentioned this before in a different live stream. All of our functions of the mind are based on a small sliver of data. It is the best that we have to work with as people, as humans. We have our own psychological functions. That's what we have to work with. But we know that all of our psychological functions come with deep limitations. And until we recognize that, we're going to be stuck within the ignorance of what we believe we know. What we believe we know already comes from a small sliver of data, so we have to be able to look beyond that to find better answers for ourselves and to find freedom from psychological suffering. All right, I'll go ahead and end things there since we are at an hour now. Stop filibustering. I didn't see any questions. I'm going to check later on if this comment I made showed up. Nobody asked questions, but some people were around a little bit longer. I take that as a good sign. It's okay. I know it's a little intimidating potentially to ask questions, or maybe people just aren't interested. Either or is fine. But again, please ask questions if you want to. You are welcome to. I'm doing these videos for you, trying to help out as much as possible. If I'm doing things terribly, you can tell me that as well. Happy to change and happy to make things better as I can for you all. All right.